Hi, everybody. It is 1 minute past the hour, so we're going to get this thing kicked off. Welcome to the Ready to Retire workshop hosted by the RCA Board of Benefit Services. We are glad that you joined us today. Retirement is a significant transition in life, and there's a lot of things to consider from how you'll spend your time, the relationships that will change in retirement, purpose, values, all of those things, and certainly finances is right up there at the top of things that can be very stressful during retirement. So while we can't address all of the different angles of what you'll need to consider as you think about retirement, we can talk about some of the financial realities, especially in regards to your RCA benefits. And so we're really glad that you've joined us, and we hope that this time is helpful. And we're excited to get into it. So there are a few housekeeping things that I'd like to go over before we really dive in. First is just a few things about Zoom. So you'll notice that you probably have a speaker view right now. Hopefully you can see me sharing right now. Sometimes that can get in the way of the slides, and so you can always condense that to one person. If you're seeing multiple people, you can click and drag that around. You can minimize it. Just know that you have some options so that you can see the content on the slides. And speaking of slides, don't worry if you're seeing a lot of information and you're worrying about capturing it. We will email out a PDF of this slide deck after the workshop. So you will have all of the content that you see on the screen afterwards. So we know that this is a lot of information and we want to make sure we provide that to you afterwards. Also, if you're having some trouble hearing what we're saying, you can always activate the closed caption option within Zoom too. It's not perfect, but it will help transcribe the things that we're saying as well. And then finally, we hope that you have questions as we go through this workshop. So during the workshop, we're going to keep you muted, but you may chat in questions, and we, as your hosts, will do our best to monitor that chat, and we'll either answer it in real time as it's relevant, or at the end, we will have a designated question and answer time. And so we'll address questions in the chat mostly at that time, and we'll also create an opportunity for you to unmute yourself if you'd prefer to just speak up and ask your question in that format too. So hopefully this will provide a lot of questions that pop up, but hopefully we'll get to some of that content that you have questions about as we speak. So there's going to be a few of us that are presenting today from the Board of Benefit Services. So I'm going to allow my colleagues to introduce themselves. So I'm going to put up Seneca's slide and I'm going to pin you. And
All
Seneca, would you
right,
share about yourself?
sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Seneca Anthony. I am the administrator for retirement. I took over when Thos retired. I am also the administrator for LTD and Life, and I've been doing that since 2015. A couple of fun facts about me. I like to travel and we'll be going to Greece later on this year. And I also like watching science focused cop shows like Fringe and Bones. So the weirder, the better.
Hello, everyone. My name is Fei Fei Liu. I am the Benefits Actual Analyst and the Project Coordinator for BOBS. I've been working with RCA since 2014. So I primarily work on the retirement projects, but also work closely with Seneca to support the day-to-day administrative work of our retirement programs.
And I'm Billy Norton. I am the Retirement and Financial Education Coordinator for the Board of Benefit Services. I love this work because I'm a naturally inclined saver. It's something I've been doing and interested in since I was a little kid. And so I like talking to other people about doing that as well. I love the outdoors, so I don't like to be cooped up in my office too long. I like to be outside walking the dog in the woods or out by the water if possible. I've been an RCA minister for over 18 years now. I've served as a minister in New Jersey and in Grand Rapids, Michigan before working for BOBS full time. And I've been on staff with BOBS since 2019. Right, so I'm going to remove those pins from my colleagues for a moment. Okay, so in this workshop, there's a few primary things that we will cover. First is a retirement checklist. A lot of you have questions. What do I need to do to prepare, or who do I need to speak to in advance? What do I need to do as I think about retirement? So we'll go over a checklist so that you have an idea of what will be helpful in the time leading up to retirement. And then we're going to get into the weeds about the RCA retirement programs so that you have an understanding of what they are and how to navigate them. We'll also get into some other important things to know. There's all sorts of common questions that come up that we want to address because we imagine that you'll have those questions too in regards to retirement and how to access funds and how to budget, all of those things. And then finally, we'll get to that question and answer time so that you can bring up some of the questions that we haven't touched on, or maybe they're a little bit more specific and unique to your circumstances. It's also important to name a few of the things that we won't cover. So one of the things we're not experts in is how to file taxes. And so this can be a learning curve in retirement. We understand that, but we're not tax experts, especially because those things are always changing. We also won't give particular and specific advice about distribution or investments in retirement. And that's because everybody's situation is unique and different. What is important for you might be different for somebody else. And so we can't comment on best practices for everyone when it comes to those two things. And then finally, like taxes, we won't get into the specifics about health insurance or Medicare, because again, those things are regularly changing and we are not experts in those fields. Now, I have to say that, but I'll also add a caveat that we will give some objective and basic information about each of those subjects that hopefully you will find helpful. So while we can't give specifics or advice, there are some basics that we can inform you about. And so we will talk about each of those subjects as we go forward in this workshop. So let's get into that checklist. What are some of the timelines and other strategies you need to be aware of as you get ready to retire? And my colleague Sinica is going to talk a little bit about the timeline for Bob's.
Okay, the timeline for Bob's. When should you contact Bob's? If possible, you should contact us 2 months prior to your retirement date. If that isn't possible, then as soon as you know you're going to retire. And once you notify us, we will email you retirement information, including distribution options, instructions, and any applicable forms.
Great. And then the other timeline that's really important is with the classes. So one of our jokes is that even if you're retired, even if they threw you a party, even if there was cake involved, you're not retired until the classis says you are. The classis has to declare you retired before you can access your retirement funds within the RCA. So one of the important things to do is to contact your classis clerk and ask about standard timelines for being declared retired. Many of you who have served in different classes over the years knows that each classis operates a little bit differently and they have different timelines for getting things done. So it's always good to just double check and say, what time would be helpful for you to know about my retirement date so that everything can get done in the timeline that would be helpful for me. So the date in which you are declared retired, it might depend on the classis meeting schedule. It might depend on the executive committee procedures or other practices. And so it's really helpful to inquire and find out what's unique about how this classis does this, what have we done in the past, and what would be helpful for you as the classis from me. A couple of interesting things about this. The date on which the classis declares you retired does impact your RCA retirement savings. So when the classis declares you retired, then you will have access to your RCA retirement savings. And you'll learn in a little bit the difference between the two plans. But in some cases, if you have money in both plans, you're actually going to need to start taking some of that money out depending on your situation. So that date that the classis declares you retired is really important when it comes to those RCA retirement funds. However, the date on which your classis declares you retired does not directly impact Social Security and Medicare. So you might be declared retired by your classis and choose not to participate in Social Security and Medicare for a few more years. Or the opposite might happen. You might still be working and already start Social Security and Medicare, right? There's some options that you can explore there. But just because you're declared retired with the RCA doesn't necessarily impact those other government programs. So let's talk a little bit about the timeline for Social Security. Remember, I said that, we're not experts in Social Security and Medicare, but there are some basic timelines that we can talk about. So you probably know this already, but there's an age range where you can begin to claim your Social Security benefit, starting at age 62 for most people and ending at age 70. And I say ending at age 70, you could still claim it after if you haven't done that, but age 70 is the latest you can extend waiting to claim Social Security to maximize that benefit in your monthly benefit. Age 62 is the earliest you can claim. And so the earlier you claim, the less of a monthly benefit that you will get. And the longer you wait, the bigger the benefit that will be. Now, there's all sorts of things to consider there. What your lifespan projection might be, what your actual immediate needs are, right? That's going to be unique to you, but that's the age range in which you can start to collect Social Security. So here's some important things about the timeline. You cannot apply more than 4 months before you wish to claim the benefit. So for those of you like me who like to plan way ahead, oh my goodness, I'm getting a call on Zoom. Okay, send a voicemail. Sorry about that. So for those of you who are like me who like to plan way ahead, you're going to have to wait until that 4 month window. However, plan on applications taking at least 6 weeks to process. So applying 3 to 4 months before you're ready to take Social Security is a wise strategy because depending on how that governmental department is operating at that time, it can be a bit of a grind to get the process started. So really give yourself as much time as legally allowed to claim the benefit. And then let's talk about Medicare as well. So there's an important timeline that you need to know here. So there's 3 different enrollment periods to consider when thinking about Medicare. The first one is what everybody thinks about when they think about Medicare, is that initial enrollment period, which is a 7-month window, which is centered on the month you turn 65. So 3 months before and 3 months after your birth month of age 65 is that initial enrollment period for Medicare. So that's when it opens up to everybody. However, you don't need to enroll in Medicare at that time if you're still working and still covered by an employer's medical insurance program. So that's where the special enrollment period comes into play. If you're still working and you're not ready to enroll in Medicare yet, there's no penalty to wait. However, once you stop working and you don't have coverage anymore by an employer's plan, that's the point in which you need to enroll in Medicare. And you have an 8-month window after leaving your employer to enroll in Medicare. And you still get all of the same benefits, pricing as you would have if you would have done it in the initial enrollment period. So those are the 2 important ones to know. Now, there's also a general enrollment period. This is simply an enrollment period that happens every single year from January 1 to March 31. And so if you miss the initial and you miss the special, all hope is not lost. You can still do it on an annual basis during that general enrollment period. However, the pricing will likely not be as good as what you would have received in the initial or the special enrollment period. So it really, really is important to do it at the time that's appropriate for your situation. There's some strategy where many people will often enroll in Part A of Medicare, even if they're still working, even if they're not really ready to enroll in the other parts of Medicare, because Part A is usually no additional cost to you, and then it's like an additional safety net of medical insurance. But here's the thing to know if you're thinking about that. Once you enroll in Part A of Medicare, you can no longer contribute to an HSA. So if contributing to an HSA is part of your saving strategy, you may want to wait to enroll in Part A of Medicare until you absolutely have to. So this slide came from a question that we often get from people, which is, how much do I need saved in retirement? How much do I need to have? And that's a question, obviously, where nobody gives a straight answer because it is so different based on what your situation is and what your needs are. So, say, for example, in retirement, you already own your home, it's paid off, and the biggest joy in your life is simply checking out a new book from the library, having a cup of coffee, and reading, right? It's a great retirement picture, and it's not all that expensive. Contrast that with somebody who wants to travel the world in retirement, or maybe they want to fund their grandkids' education, or perhaps they dream of sailing around on their yacht and covering all the marina fees that go with that. Those retirement pictures have a much different income need than the person who has their house paid off and reads a lot from the library. So, based on your dreams and your realistic situation, that will dictate how much money you need in retirement. So rather than thinking about a dollar amount that you need saved for retirement, it is much more helpful to make a budget. And I know that it sounds a little bit daunting to be able to make a budget for something that is in the future, but the closer you get to retirement, the easier it becomes to budget for those years because it's not going to change drastically. Many of your expenses will be consistent with what they are now as you get closer to retirement. The big exception there is healthcare. Always take what you think will be the cost of healthcare in retirement and fluff that up a little bit in your budget because that tends to be a touch more expensive than people anticipate in retirement. But you make a budget. And once you make a budget, then you have your number. Then you can say, okay, this is the amount of money that I'm going to need per month to live the life that I envision living in those retirement years. And from there, then you can start to examine your income sources. So you can say, okay, how much might I need to pull from my RCA retirement accounts? How much could I expect to withdraw from Social Security? And maybe there's other sources of income, other retirement accounts. Maybe you have a rental property that's producing some income. You can start to examine the different potential income streams and begin to adjust those to see if you can make it work to meet that budget that you've identified. And from there, you'll be able to say, okay, this works and I'm going to have enough to live this lifestyle, or I either need to adjust my budget so that it fits these possible income streams, or maybe I need to adjust my expectations for working a little bit longer or working part-time in those retirement years so that I can live the life that I hope to live in retirement. All right, so now it's time to get into the weeds of the RCA retirement plans. And before I toss it over to Seneca, I'll just highlight that many of you who are about to retire, who have worked in the RCA for a long time, might have money in two different RCA retirement plans, and each one of them has a little bit of a different implication for how you access them and envision using them. So that's why we're going to spend some time really talking about how to understand them and how to understand how they interact as well. So I encourage you, pay close attention and you'll come away with this much better suited to understand how these income streams will work in retirement. So Seneca, take it away.
Sure, let's transition. Okay, so we'll start with the RCA retirement plan. So when I send you the retirement email with information about this plan, you will also receive a distribution form that needs to be completed and returned to us within 60 days. So with this plan, you cannot take a full payout. That's always one of the most common questions. So you cannot take a full payout. You cannot do a rollover. You are required to immediately make a systematic withdrawal election, and you will do that by completing the form that you send back to us. So you have two options when you make the selection. You can set a specific amount that you want to be paid to you monthly, quarterly, or annually. Or if you do not have a specific amount in mind, you can have your account fully paid out over a period of time. There are a couple of things to keep in mind when making your election. The first being that once you make an election, it cannot be changed at a later date. This is why it's important to speak with a financial advisor before making your decision. And the second thing is that federal and state taxes are withheld. So something to keep in mind when you're filling out the form is that the amount that you put down is the gross amount. It is before taxes. The RCA retirement plan, it is a salary deferred compensation plan. So at the end of the year, you will receive a W-2 to file with your taxes. It's all seen as compensation, salary. As for housing allowance, so you may declare up to 100% of your distributions from this plan as housing allowance. You cannot designate any distributions as housing allowance upfront. You will do so when you file your taxes. So you tend to get money back. You'll get a refund and get your money back on the back end, not on the front end. One other important thing to mention about this that is not on the slide is that you do have an optional 5% lump sum distribution. You can take an annual sum up to 5%, so it doesn't have to be 5% of your account balance. Your initial withdrawal is immediate, and then the same percentage will be paid out each year around February or March. Again, once you elect this option, it cannot be changed or stopped. The annual lump sum is in addition to your required systematic withdrawal election. So for any of you who are already receiving the 5% lump sum, you are still required to set up the systematic withdrawal election when you retire. Sorry, go ahead, Billy. I'm sorry. You can move to the next slide. So now we'll move on to the 403B. You'll have full access to your entire account balance upon retirement. Fidelity handles all distributions from this account. If you receive forms from Fidelity, please return them back to Fidelity, not to us, not to Bob's. To initiate distributions from your 403B, you can either do that online through your net benefits account, or you can call Fidelity directly. So the 403B has a lot more flexibility when it comes to taking withdrawals. You can set up systematic withdrawals. You can take a partial withdrawal or full payout. You also have the option of doing a rollover or purchasing an annuity. You can also leave the money in the plan. So if you don't need the money when you first retire, you can actually just leave it in there. And then at the age of 73, that's when the IRS mandates that you begin taking distributions. And those are known as the required minimum distributions, or RMDs. So we have a calculator posted on the RCA website to help you calculate that. Or you can call Fidelity and they will do it free of charge. If you are working, if you are 73 and actively working, meaning that Classes has notified us, Classes has sent in that form stating that you are a retired minister under contract, then you are not required to take the RMD. We'll talk about the taxes a little bit. So all distributions from the 403B, except housing distributions, will have a 20% federal tax withheld. State taxes will also be withheld, and that amount is calculated by Fidelity based on the state's tax table. If you want any of your distributions as housing allowance, you can request them as housing distributions. And once you do that, Fidelity will not withhold federal or state taxes, so you will get the full amount. For the 403B, you will receive a 1099-R to file with your taxes. Housing distributions will be listed as undefined on the tax form. Fidelity usually mails the form at the end of February, but you can also access that information through your net benefits account as well. One other thing to mention on here, prior to retirement, when you reach age 59 and a half, you can withdraw all of your employee contributions. That includes pre-tax and Roth, but you cannot withdraw any employer contributions until retirement. That's all I have.
Thank you, Seneca. So next, I will talk about the RCA Retirement Plan Reallocation Program. So this program we started in 2015. It provides opportunity for eligible participants to move the funds from the RCA retirement plan to their RCA 403(b) account once per calendar year. The reason we offer this program is because, as Seneca mentioned, compared to the old RCA retirement plan, the RCA 403(b) provides more withdrawal options, flexibility for your retirement planning, and also for the clergy participants that you can request housing distributions directly from this account. So there's no fees or tax consequences with this program. And also currently, this is the only way to move the funds out of the RCA retirement plan on a pre-tax basis. To be eligible for this program this year, we're looking at the participants who have worked for RCA employer, which includes RCA Church, classes, regional synod, or other RCA 403(b) adopting employers after year 1/1/2021. So for the timeline this year, we target to send information form to all potential eligible participants on June 1st, 2026, and they will given 2 months to complete and submit the form. We will then calculate the amount that can be reallocated this year and then work with Fidelity to arrange the transaction, which usually take place by mid-August. So we have some frequently asked questions on our website. But if you have questions like you're not sure if you're eligible or not, or you want to get an estimate and how much can be reallocated for each year, please feel free to contact me. So for participants, if you still have a balance in this old plan and you meet the eligibility requirements, I hope you take advantage of this program.
Thanks, Feifei. And before I hop to the next slide, I like to double down on what Feifei just said and just highlight for those of you in the workshop, this is one of the most important slides. We tend to run into two kinds of ministers, those that participate in the reallocation program and those that desperately wish they had when they had the opportunity. It is so much better for you to have your funds moved from the RCA retirement plan into the 403(b) program if you're eligible to participate. So please, if you're getting eligibility emails about this, don't let it pass you by. Participate if you're able, ask Feifei questions. It's you'll be pleased with yourself if you participate in this. I'm sure of it. So yeah, we'll hop to the next slide, Feifei. Thanks.
Thank you, Billy. So next is about net benefits. So net benefits. So net benefits is a Fidelity portal for its participants to manage their accounts online. So which also include our RCA 403(b) and RCA retirement plan accounts. So participants can very easily check their balance, pull all the transaction history, and review all the investment lineup, change their investment options there. And also during the tax season, that's a place you can get your tax form, W-2 or 1099-R. And for the RCA 403 plan, you can initiate most of the transactions there, including a rollover if you want to take loans or distributions. For the RCA retirement plan, that will be also the place that if you want to customize the taxes withholding for your distributions.
Great, thank you. All right, let's just get into a few other important things to know. And these are based on common questions that we get as staff. So one of the big questions is not only how much do I need to have saved, but how do I invest during retirement, right? That can be daunting too. You want to have your money continue to grow and at least keep up with inflation, maybe beat it, but you also might not want to risk too much, right? There's a lot of factors at play. And so there's a couple of things that that you should be aware of as you wonder about that. And the first is that if your funds are in a target date retirement fund, those funds have a glide path that continues on through the retirement date. And so Fidelity does have a glide path that anticipates having the right mix of assets so that you are, exposed to enough risk that your money continues to grow, but it's much more heavily secured in bonds and other things like that. So if you're in a target date fund, they call them the Fidelity Freedom Fund, which most of our participants are, you could just leave it like that. And that's usually a decent set it and forget it way to go. You could always, of course, do it yourself. There are different investments in the plan lineup that you could choose from based on your specific circumstances, but there's also some other ways to get help if you'd like to be a little bit more active. So we offer a Fidelity managed account. There's a 0.5% advisory fee. So for example, because I like using real numbers, if your balance is $500,000, your monthly fee would be $208 to use the Fidelity managed account. They have somebody that connects with you, gets a sense of your actual picture, and then they can manage those investments for you based on your needs. Also, we have partnered with a company called Everence. They have a financial planning wing. They've been fantastic for our pastors. They know clergy tax as well. They have a sense for what ministers' needs are and where their hearts are. And so I've really enjoyed partnering our ministers with their financial planning team. And so I do say that they have an offer to RCA clergy for $1,500 a year, which is a significant discount. So they don't need to manage a percentage of your portfolio or anything like that. It's just a straight fee, which comes out to $125 a month. And they're really helpful and can do kind of a full financial planning with you beyond just the retirement assets, but insurances, charitable giving, everything. So you can contact Bob's if you're interested in getting connected with them. And then finally, there's a lot of other good financial planners out there. Most of them typically would charge a 1% of your fee from your assets. So, if we use our numbers above, if your balance is $500,000, that would come out to about $416 a month. So again, that's not a small number based on the amount of assets that you have, but there's plenty of people who have good hearts and knowledge that can help you manage your funds. However, and this is what I implore of you, please make sure they understand the tax benefits of being a clergy in the U.S. tax system, because so many of the financial planners that we encounter will counsel their people to roll their funds out of the RCA retirement plans and into their own funds that they can then more actively manage. The problem with this is that when you roll your funds out, if you're an ordained minister, you lose your housing allowance benefit. And so you have to be sure that your planners understand the housing allowance benefit so that they're not giving you advice that could end up costing you thousands of dollars, sometimes per year, in retirement. And that's a good segue into this next subject. Yes, you get to claim the housing allowance in retirement if you're an RCA minister. So this is a significant benefit. And I want to talk through some of the particulars with you about this. So it works very similarly to the housing allowance before you retire. So many of you know that when you're working, you can claim the lowest of the following three things: your actual expenses, the fair rental value of your primary residence, and the amount declared in advance. Now, when you're working, this is usually done by your consistory at your church, right? In the calendar year prior, they'll designate X amount of dollars as your housing allowance. Well, in retirement, you don't have a consistory to do that. So the Board of Benefit Services acts as the board that prospectively declares your housing allowance. So rather than a certain dollar number, Bob simply says up to 100% of your distributions from the RCA retirement plan or the RCA 403B plan are eligible for the housing allowance. So up to 100%, that's the important thing. That doesn't mean that all of the dollars that you withdraw from those two plans are going to be housing allowance. It just means that up to 100% are eligible. it's still going to be the lowest of the three things. So it's going to be either your actual housing expenses or the fair rental value of your home that will be the deciding factor of how much of those distributions can be claimed as housing allowance. And another key factor here is it's only those funds from the RCA retirement plans that are eligible for the housing allowance. So let me give you a quick example. Let's say that you're getting $30,000 a year from Social Security and you're withdrawing $20,000 from the RCA retirement plans. Well, if your housing expenses are $30,000 this year, you can't claim all 30,000 as housing allowance. You can only claim the 20,000 that you've withdrawn from the RCA retirement plans. So it's only those funds that were earned and saved working in a ministry job in the church plan that are eligible for the housing allowance in retirement. Each year, Bob's will send a letter that you can file with your taxes stating that up to 100% of distributions from those two retirement plans are eligible for the housing allowance. And if you're ever searching for that because you're kind of catching up on taxes or you missed the letter, they're always on our website. So you go to www.rca.org, you search for housing allowance letters in the search bar, that page will pop up, and you can access the last 7 years of housing allowance letters right there for you. So when you're filing your taxes in retirement, it gets a little bit challenging to figure out how the housing allowance works. That's why it's really helpful to have a tax preparer who understands clergy taxes. Those who do absolutely know how to do this in retirement, but it's really important to get help there, especially in those first years of transitioning into retirement. Now, Seneca mentioned this too, but I want to reiterate the way that you do it with the two different retirement plans is different. So with the 403B plan, it's a lot more simple. You can simply say, hey, I want these distributions to be housing distributions. And in that case, Fidelity says, okay, we're not going to withhold any taxes. We're just going to give you the full amount. But then if you don't spend all of that on your housing expenses, you will need to pay in taxes on the remainder. With the RCA retirement plan, it's the opposite. Fidelity has to withhold taxes from those distributions. So they're going to withhold taxes and pay those in for you. But then in tax filing time, as you're filing your taxes, you can claim the housing allowance. And then in most cases, you will have overpaid your taxes because Fidelity withheld those for you. And so you'll get it back in the form of a refund. And then a few last things that I want to share with you. Feifei mentioned all of the great things that you can do within Net Benefits. I'll add that Net Benefits has a really good planning and learning center, so you can access on-demand workshops, calculators, different tools to help you get a better sense of what you can expect in retirement, helping to anticipate healthcare costs in retirement, understanding how to strategize Social Security withdrawals, really good resources. So it's worth poking around in your Net Benefits account and checking that out. And then finally, a few other odds and ends to know about. When you retire as an RCA minister, you, and if you have a spouse, will be assigned to a retiree chaplain. These are people who Bob's employs to check in on our retirees and their spouses, to help you to remain connected to the life of the RCA, and also to make sure that your basic needs are being met. So one of the things that we administer is the assistance program. Our colleague Mornier Rich is in charge of this. And essentially, if people deplete their retirement accounts, this is a fund that they can access to help keep food on the table, to make sure that the heat bill is being paid. But retiree chaplains are often the people who help facilitate us learning about those needs and meeting them. There are also some Medicare options through the Reform Benefits Association, so feel free to check in with them as you explore your Medicare options. For life insurance, you may port your group life insurance to an individual life insurance policy once you retire, but it has to be done within 31 days of your retirement date. And it's also important to note that for long-term disability insurance, that ends when you terminate your employment or retire within the RCA. So you cannot continue the long-term disability insurance beyond that. Okay, folks, that was a ton of information, and we are going to allow you to unmute yourselves if I can figure this out. All right, host tools for participants. Okay, allowed you all to unmute yourselves now, so that's great. And we've got some questions in the chat, I believe, as well. So I would say let's open it up now, and feel free to chat in questions or unmute yourselves, and we will address what we can.
Yeah,
Dale, go for it.
yeah. I've got two questions. One is in relation to the lump sum designation in addition to the regular amount. So what you're saying is we can establish $2,000 a month as a regular withdrawal, and in addition to that, we could request a 5% lump sum distribution. Is that correct?
Seneca, you want to take that?
Yeah, that is correct. And
Okay.
so it's in addition to the systematic distributions. So that is correct. And
All
it's
right.
up to 5%. Again, you don't have to take the whole 5%. You can take 3%, 2%. You can
Sure.
elect those amounts also. But again, once you settle on an amount, it cannot change at a later date. And so you'll
Okay.
continue to receive your monthly distributions of the 2,000. And then also if you wanted 4% every year, you would get that in addition.
Okay. And that's just the RCA retirement fund.
Correct.
Okay. All right. And if we're able to, all of that can be used as housing because it's an RCA fund.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. One other clarification, because I have communicated with Unum about the long-term disability
Care, long-term care.
Oh, that's different than the LTD.
Yes.
Okay. Because the long-term care it's our own policy, and we can continue that as long as we pay the premiums.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Very
the
good.
long-term care is something that Bob's no longer administers, but a lot of ministers, including myself, ported that to individual policies after. So a lot of us still have the Unum long-term care, but we don't manage that anymore.
Gotcha. No, very helpful. Thanks.
So one that came in the chat was, is the RCA 403B program the same as the 403B account that would have been created for elective deferrals in the 1990s? And I would say no, because up until 2005, I believe, we had the RCA retirement plan, and then the 403B came after that. So whatever you set up in the 90s would have not been the RCA 403B program. We also had a question from somebody who's got money in our program, but also in the Canadian RCA retirement account. And unfortunately, Bob's does not administer any of the Canadian programs, and so we can't comment on how you would access or any of the rules around any Canadian benefits that you might have. And you would likely need to go to the Synod of Canada for that information. Another question in here, explain what happens with the RCA retirement plan if I die before all the funds are distributed, or on the flip side, if the systematic withdrawal exhausts funds before I die, since one or the other is the most likely thing to happen. Seneca, do you want to go for that one?
Sorry. There you go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So if you die and you still have funds remaining in the RCA retirement plan, it will go to your beneficiary. Okay. One of the things that, and this is a good segue into beneficiary. So you just want to make sure that you check both plans to make sure that you have designated beneficiaries. Okay. If you're alive and funds are depleted, then that's it. You don't receive any more payments from that plan.
And Seneca, will you talk a little bit about the choice that a spouse has with the RCA retirement plan when they, become the beneficiary?
Sure. So if a spouse is the beneficiary, they have two options. One being that they can receive a full payout. So whatever funds are remaining in there, they can take a lump sum payout, or they can continue the distributions as you have elected them. So if a minister elects, let's say, $2,000 per month, then the spouse can continue that election, or again, take a full payout. Now, if it's a non-spousal beneficiary, let's say it's a contingent beneficiary, then the only option that they have would be a full payout.
Thanks, Seneca. What else? What other questions do you have?
And just one more thing, going back to the beneficiary, since we're on that topic. If you are currently married and you want to designate someone other than your spouse, including a trust or an estate, as your beneficiary, you need spousal consent in order to do that. So that means that you want to make sure that the beneficiary form that we have has the spousal consent section completed, as well as notary completed. Okay, so that's just an FYI. A prenup, a postnup, they do not override the beneficiary rules of our policies. And if you don't have a designated beneficiary and you are married at the time that you die, then it automatically goes to your spouse.
We just had a really good question come in. So the question is, when the clergy person dies, can the spouse still claim the housing allowance from those distributions? And the answer, unfortunately, is no. The housing allowance benefit only exists during the lifetime of the minister. So again, that's just another thing with your income strategy to tuck away as you figure out, how much to leave in, if you're going to roll some out. All of that, plays into the housing allowance question. So know that while the minister is alive, you may claim the housing allowance in retirement, but when the minister who owns that account passes away and it goes to the spousal beneficiary, the spouse can no longer claim the housing allowance. Carl, yes. You're muted.
This goes back to the housing allowance question. So you can't use any of the the 403B for housing allowance. It's only the plan that was before 2005, I guess.
No, that's not correct. Both plans are eligible for the housing allowance.
Okay. What would be the advantage of doing it from the more flexible one, or the one that is less flexible?
Oh, the advantage with the 403B is the reporting is easier. We have created a document on the Board of Benefits Services website that talks about how people have worked with their tax providers to claim the housing allowance with the older RCA retirement plan. It's really helpful. It is possible, people do it, but it is a little bit perplexing for tax providers, tax filers, and it's just not as straightforward. With a 403B, it's straightforward. It's easier because you get that benefit right away when you take the distributions, because you can elect housing distributions. So if you have both and you're able to do it through the 403B, that's the ideal way. But for some people, especially for folks who want to deplete the RCA retirement plan first, it's certainly very possible to claim the housing allowance with the RCA retirement plan.
Okay, all right.
Another note that I made as I read through some of your questions in the registration, occasionally we'll hear people talk about the RCA pension, and I always like to reiterate, we do not have a pension. So there is something about a pension that is nice, where if people have a pension, there's that like stable sort of train of income for life. But with a pension, when you die, like that's it. It goes away. The beautiful thing with the RCA funds is those funds are yours. So if there's money left when you pass away, that goes to your beneficiaries. So I always just like to remind people, this is not a pension. We do not have a pension.
Billy?
Yes.
I guess my question is around the RMDs. If the plan would be to deplete the RCA retirement plan, and so a good percentage of it, an annual income, would come from the RCA retirement plan for a couple of years, is there a required RMD from the 403B?
When you turn 73,
Yeah,
there
when you turn
is.
73, there would be an RMD out of the 403B.
Yes,
They would be
but
required out of both plans.
no. So the RCA retirement plan doesn't have any RMDs.
Uh,
But the caveat there is you have to start taking money out of it as soon as you retire.
even if it's $1.
Yes.
Thanks.
Hmm. Other questions?
David Patterson. Just a clarification, Seneca, on the additional percentage withdrawal from the RCA retirement plan in addition to the systematic withdrawals. Is that also once you have elected that, that is permanent and you can't change it from year to year?
Yes. Okay. And you can actually opt into that at any time. Okay. So when you're first establishing your systematic withdrawals, that's the only thing that's required at that time is to just set up those systematic distributions. You can come back at a later date, the next year from now or 2 years from now and say, hey, I want to opt into the annual 5% lump sum. Okay. But like you said, once it starts, it's permanent.
Carl.
I just had for clarification, did I hear it right that all these, anytime we take a withdrawal, whether it's a 403 or the other fund, it's a 20% federal tax on that?
Well, okay. Not well, so that's the default, right? That's what Fidelity will naturally withhold unless you select housing distributions from the 403B. That doesn't mean that that's the taxes that you'll end up owing. It's just like they figure like that's a decent safety net for making sure that people don't have a huge tax bill at the end of the year. So you'll still be subject to the regular tax brackets, whatever they are at the time that you're taking distributions.
Okay.
But that's just sort of like a blanket. We're going to withhold this much to make sure you're getting some taxes paid in.
But then if you don't pay that amount, they give that back, I'm assuming.
Right, yeah. If you don't owe that much, you get it back as a refund. And if you owe more, then you have to pay in more. But yeah, that's just a general amount. And then for the RCA retirement plan, there is a W-4 that you can fill out that will allow some like wiggle room with how many taxes are withheld. Because the strange thing about that plan is that it's reported on a W-2. So if you have money in that plan and you're taking distributions, you're going to get a W-2 each year for that.
Okay.
I forget, are taxes withheld out of the RCA retirement plan?
Yes, they are. And that's the one that you can't like have them not do that, like the 403B for housing. So they're going to withhold taxes on the RCA retirement plan. And then if you claim the housing allowance on that, you'll usually get that back as a refund.
But it's still a 20%.
Faith, do you want to take that one?
No, it will be based on the wage table. But you can customize it on the net benefits. So it will be based on your marital status and number of dependents.
Okay.
And the state taxes, there's no way around it. It will be like it will be required.
Right. Yeah, it's just like compensation. That's why the yeah. Okay. Thanks.
I'd like to ask a question if I may.
Please do.
So you were talking about how to invest during retirement. So is it the 403B, is it currently with Fidelity in a Freedom Fund? And if we don't do anything, it'll continue there? Or do we have to ask them to manage it? How does that work?
So your funds will stay invested exactly how they currently are. There will be no change on your retirement date with how your funds are invested. So I would need to pull up your account to see how you're invested right now. But yeah, there would be no changes. However, with both of the funds, you can change your investments at any time, whenever you want. So you can put it. You don't even have to do the Freedom Fund of your own retirement date, right? You can adjust up and down based on your own risk tolerances. But we always have a fund lineup that you can choose to invest in that has a good blend of different asset classes. And then beyond that, we offer more recently a self-directed brokerage link, which is a little riskier because we don't monitor those funds, but it essentially opens up into a world of like thousands of mutual funds that you can choose from if you're not finding what you want within our fund lineup. So there are options, but nothing will change from how you're currently invested when you retire.
Okay, how does it work with Everence then? Do they just manage the Fidelity funds, or are they transferred out of Fidelity? How does that work?
So for most of our ministers who use them, Everence will just print out the fund lineup and then make recommendations to say like, hey, let's do 75% here, 25% there, or whatever it might be. And then you'll go in and manually do that, or you could sit down in the same room with them, log into your account, and they can walk you through it together. But rather than them making adjustments directly, they'll need to do that through you and make recommendations.
Okay, so the funds would stay with Fidelity. We would be managing it ourselves with them consulting with them as advising us on how to do that.
Yes, if that is what your situation calls for. So, for example, what I've noticed with a lot of our ministers who have a decent like balance within the RCA retirement funds, the Everence advisor has recommended, okay, let's keep enough in there to make sure that we're utilizing the housing allowance and that there's enough for all your housing expenses. But beyond that, sometimes they'll roll some of it out into an IRA so that they can make qualified charitable distributions and have that tax benefit too. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an all or nothing, but sometimes it's let's keep some here, let's move some there.
Okay. But if they manage it or consult, we still get the housing benefit because it stays with Fidelity. Is that right?
That's right. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Billy, I have one more question.
Go for it.
At least one more at this moment. Related to Bob's being our board to establish housing allowance, does that have to, like with most consistories, it's done prior to the year and designated amount? Is that something that we would have to do with Bob's, or the letter that I understand says up to 100%?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's all that needs to happen. You don't need to take any agency with that other than keeping it for your tax filing purposes. But people get confused about the dates on the letter because it says it's written in the fall of the prior year for the tax year, but we usually don't give it to you until the following year when you're filing the taxes for the prior tax year. So the housing allowance letter for this year says October 2024 at the top because they did it for 2025. And now in 2026, you're filing it for the 2025 calendar year. So all that is to say that Bob's does it in advance, but you don't need to do anything because it's just a blanket up to 100% of your distributions.
And so we don't need to contact Bob's every December to say what the next year is. We're just going to have access to that letter for when we file.
Yeah, I mean, you're retired. You don't need to be troubled with all of that stuff. So we're going to take care of it. We're going to email it out to you, and you guys, have your drink of choice on the beach.
Love it. Thanks.
Are there any others before we wrap up?
Yeah, I have one more.
Okay, go ahead.
It's with that housing allowance. I'm a little slow on some of this. You had mentioned that there's some letter that comes out. Is that the one that we have to make sure that I didn't quite understand that, I guess.
It's just something, it's a letter from Bob saying that these distributions were from a church plan and they're eligible for the housing allowance. And then so when you're filing your taxes, it just substantiates that, yes, this dollar amount that I'm claiming was housing expenses is now tax exempt from federal income and state taxes. So it's just a letter that supports it. You're not going to submit any other documentation when you're filing your taxes, but you should be able to substantiate it should you be audited.
Okay, and so we need that letter basically, or have responded to it before we receive any retirement income from our accounts.
No, not necessarily. You'll be taking money out, and then at tax time we'll just make sure you have that letter. So, and again, it's just something to have that you're going to add to your tax filing.
Okay.
Oh, one other thing that I forgot that I wanted to mention about housing allowance. So one thing I commonly run into with retirees is they're going to purchase a home in retirement. Like they're going to do that, and they're like, well, I'm just going to take a ton of money out of my 403b and purchase the home, and it's going to be great because it's going to be tax free, like for housing allowance. And I always have to break it to them. No, you're always limited by the fair rental value of your primary residence. So even if you're like withdrawing $200,000 and putting that all into a home, if the fair rental value of that home is only $40,000 a year, the rest of that $160,000 is going to be a taxable event. So as much as we'd like to say, hey, this was spent on our home, you're always going to be limited by the fair rental value, and that especially makes a difference when you're purchasing a home in those early retirement years. So just know that it takes a little bit of strategy to fully maximize the housing allowance benefit. Just because you're spending it on the home doesn't mean it's eligible. You still have the checks and balances that the IRS sets.
Thank you.
Okay.
So
Again, that was a
one
lot of
question.
information, and I love the question. Oh, Blaine, we'll do one more.
Yeah, just one question about housing allowance. Kind of a unique situation. The home that we live in was a rental. It was an income property for us. Now we've moved into it, and it was a weekly rental, and it was also a monthly rental. But if we were to amortize the weekly rental, that amount would be quite significant. How does the IRS look at fair market rental value? If I have a track record of showing, we were able to rent it for this amount weekly and to amortize that over, 52 weeks, or do they have some kind of a formula for how that works? How do they understand fair market rental value?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, of the three checks and balances for the housing allowance, the fair rental market value is the grayest of all of them. So, it is the hardest to pinpoint. What I typically do is I go to my real estate agent and say, hey, if my house were to be rented out, fully furnished, with all the utilities paid for, all inclusive, like people can come in, there's a bed there, there's a TV to watch, what might it rent for per month? And then she gives me a number, and it's usually, pretty high. It's usually much more than our actual expenses. Um, I would imagine you're looking at more of a monthly number for a long-term rental. That would be the number to use. I I doubt that they would go for a short-term rental fee in that regard. But again, this is only in the case of an audit, and as long as you can, yeah, I guess have some comparables and substantiate it, but it's a hard one. And so I can't answer that one perfectly, but just give you some of those things to think about as you set your fair rental value. All right, friends. So this was a lot of information. So we're going to send some follow-up resources, including the slide deck and some other really helpful resources that hopefully you'll find beneficial. And really, this is to give you friendly faces at the Board of Benefit Services. We never mind reaching out via phone or email to do follow-up questions. So email us. The main address is retirement@rca.org. That's our main staff inbox. And then we kind of kick that to whoever is best suited to answer your questions. So don't hesitate to reach out. We're so happy for you as you consider this next chapter in life, and we hope you have a great rest of the day. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Have a great day.